There's news in the NFL today, and it's time to break it down in the only way we know how. Hot Route style, with our spin on football headlines with a mix of frozen tundras, neck rolled, and grass-stained jersey.
Hello and welcome back to Hot Routes. I am your host, as always, Paul Hodowanic, and with me today is Purple Insider's own Sam Ekstrom. Sam, how are we doing today? It's been a few weeks since you've been on.
Indeed, it has. I'm back. I'm full of hot takes for Hot Routes. Let's get going.
Awesome. Let's do it. All right. So I know from listening to the podcast and from the YouTube, watching all the YouTube stuff, you're very much in the bucket of an offensive head coach. You're not against defensive head coaches, but I know you favor the offensive guys just for the stability that it can present and kind of just changing up what we currently have. But I'm going to take that away from you. I'm not going to let you.
No.
I'm going to take away those offensive guys, and I'm going to make you talk about the defensive head coach options. So I want to rank just like your top 3 defensive head coach options, because the Vikings have set up interviews with a lot of them. I believe more defensive head coaches, defensive-minded guys than offensive-minded people have been requested to interview for the Vikings. So they seem to be majorly considering it. So I felt like it'd be a good time to go through just who you think are kind of the cream of the crop there.
Yeah, I think the number's at 5 now that they've requested or interviewed. So I'm going to eliminate 2. I'm going to eliminate Dan Quinn. Matthew and I talked about this on Tuesday's show, I believe. We just weren't that impressed with what he did in the body of work with Atlanta. They underachieved in the later years, and they had one really good team where the stars aligned, but that does not necessarily make you a genius defensively. So we're not a huge Dan Quinn fan, even though he seems like a well-liked person. DeMeco Ryans is just way too recently in the league for me, for my taste. I mean, I hate just pigeonholing guys that I don't know for kind of one reason, but it's so hard to like buy into that when he was playing 5 years ago. So here's my top 3 of those that have been discussed or interviewed. Number 3, Todd Bowles. We'll count down to 1. I'm willing to let the Jets thing go because it's the Jets. Like I'm sure there've been a lot of good coaches go through Cleveland over the years too, that were just like fell prey to the organizational dysfunction. And he did even get one winning season out of them. So I'm willing to let that one go. He seems to be really appreciated for his work in Tampa. And I think he's, built something pretty amazing there. So I think that Bowles would be fine. Number 2, and people are sleeping on this guy, Jonathan Gannon. 39 years old, history with the Vikings. He was the assistant DB's coach from 2014 to 2017. So clearly, if they knew he wasn't worthy, they would not have done this interview because they have the book on Jonathan Gannon. So that tells you a little bit of information. He's a DB's guy. He's been around the block. He's one of those guys that sort of jumped out of college and climbed the ladder. And I think when you've got like a young coaching lifer who doesn't really have playing experience, that doesn't bother me. I also think it might make you a little more analytical, a little more modern in your thinking. That tends to be the trend with what we see from some of these younger coaches that have been in the game for like 15 years. And experience is not an issue, I don't think, because he's been with various organizations. He's had a lot of different roles. So I think that Gannon is kind of a sleeper. Maybe in the Brandon Staley vein. And number 1 would be Raheem Morris, because he got this huge Jalen Ramsey endorsement, which means something. The way he got Atlanta to play for him last year as the interim head coach, I thought was really impressive. He's been around the block and he sticks around. Like he seems to have really good loyalty, which means that, not only is he loyal, but people are loyal to him because he stays in places for a long time. He was with Tampa for like 8 years and, he was with Atlanta for a long time. So I think Morris would be a solid hire on the defensive side of the ball. I'm still prejudiced to that side, but I appreciate some of these guys' resumes.
Yes, I am also very much with you in the offensive minded coach, that's where I would prefer they go. Again, just for that stability that it could present. Not having 4 coordinators in 4 years, I think, is pivotal for an offense, especially starting out if you have a young quarterback that you're bringing in or something like that. So I would much prefer an offensive mind. But my defensive rankings are similar. I had Raheem Morris at 1 as well. Just a couple things you didn't mention. He was on the offensive side of the ball previously in his career. In Atlanta, he's a quarterback's coach with Kyle Shanahan. So he very much understands both sides of the ball. So I think, you're not going to get the Zimmer only caring about the defense, then maybe putting in little quips with the offense when he's not in there every day with them. I think Raheem Morris could be more of a coach that's doing things on both sides of the ball. So I think that is really important and really intriguing, just to kind of see what he does. And then also, he came into the Rams and pretty much they kind of asked him to keep running the Staley defense. They were like, this worked really well, like just run it again. And so the defensive numbers haven't been as good, but I think it shows his malleability to, okay, I'm not going to just run my stuff. Like if the Staley defense is what they want, and this is kind of where the personnel is tailored to, like that's the defense I'm going to help run. And it might not be what I'm the most comfortable with, but if it's what they believe is going to be the best for the team, let's do it. And we're going to adapt. So I think both those factors really influenced me in saying, okay, Raheem Morris could be a good head coach. And like you said, the players seemed to love him last year and seemed to be a little bit upset that he didn't get him a bigger chance. So I think he was my number 1. Number 2 actually is D'Amico Ryans. I am more intrigued by him than you are. I think he obviously, it says a lot that they made him the defensive coordinator after so little coaching experience. Like if I'm not mistaken, there were several 49ers incumbent coaches that had been on the staff for 7 or 8 years that had plenty more experience, and they decided to go with Ryans. And so I think that is, telling of what they believe in him, what they see in him. And so it might be a little bit more of a risk, but I think there's a little bit more home run potential with him than maybe some of the defensive minded guys like Todd Bowles or Dan Quinn, where you kind of feel like you know what you're getting. And then 3, this guy hasn't been interviewed yet, but I think Brian Flores, if he was ever an option, should be considered. He was 3rd only because there's kind of some issues with, does he get along with management, ownership? And so that kind of knocked him down my list. But in terms of pure coaching pedigree, he makes sense to be on the list as well. So that was my top 3. I'm excited. We had some differences there.
Yeah, I can respect going for the home run. I guess Dan Campbell is a little bit, in that Ryans vein. I think Campbell was playing not that long ago either. And if you have the leadership and you have the X's and O's, that counts for something. Sometimes I wonder if some of the nuances will be there with such a recent former player. But again, never talked to the guy. So we're kind of going on like a very high level information, right?
All right, let's jump in to our next one. More head coaching stuff. I want to know, of the coaches in the playoffs right now, you could just steal one of them. You could just grab one guy and say, okay, you're coming and you're going to be the Vikings head coach. Of the current crop that are still in the playoffs, which coach would you want to bring in to this specific Vikings situation?
I think it's got to be McVay. You're bringing in someone who kind of is the Zimmer opposite. He's enthusiastic. He's a quarterback's guy. He's used to coming into a not great situation, which he did in LA, and he made that situation great very quickly. But most importantly, this is the guy that got the most out of Jared Goff. That's the sparkling gem on his resume. You could have made an argument for LaFleur, and certainly you drop in Arians or Reed anywhere, you're probably going to get a lot out of that team. But if you're building something here in Minnesota, I'd go with McVay. I think he seems to choose good coaching staffs as well, which I think counts for something when you're hiring out a new one.
Yeah, he was up high on my list. I think Andy Reid is an obvious name just for everything that he can do for an offense. But one of the under the radar guys that I think would be really good is Sean McDermott. Just because of the scenario he walked into in Buffalo. I think it's very similar to the one that's here with the Vikings. Team that, has been kind of mired in mediocrity. Buffalo was probably even a little worse than the Vikings have been, but was able to kind of turn that thing around relatively quickly. is seemingly, if you're going to have that more defensive-minded guy, you have to have someone who's going to let the offensive coordinator handle the reins. It seems like he's done that with Brian Daboll. Daboll's been able to kind of flourish in that role. And he just seems generally to be a really, really good leader. So I probably would lean towards McVay, but McDermott kind of makes me wonder if everything that he's done kind of almost makes me put aside the offensive stuff for him. So that was my only other option, I really think, because with some of the Arians, Andy Reid guys, you feel good, but you don't quite know how much time they're going to coach they have left and if they're into a rebuild or something like that. So I think both McVay and McDermott would be really, really good options. Mm-hmm. Obviously, in a dream world that we are not living in. But I want to continue with our dream world just a little bit for one more head coaching question. I want to know if we could create our fictional dream team of a staff. You need a head coach, maybe defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, but you can only pick from coaches from movies or TV. So you have to reach in your memory bank for all the sports television movies that you watch and create your dream team staff.
Amazing question. And I'm sure that we'll have different staffs put together because there's just so many good football movies and shows, and I've seen nowhere near all of them. Mm-hmm. I did keep it to football, at least in my answer. Like, I didn't go get Herb Brooks to be the football coach. But so I was torn between Kevin O'Shea and Danny O'Shea for my head coach because Little Giants is one of the great football movies ever made, the annexation of Puerto Rico. And I think I love that creativity from Danny O'Shea, the Rick Moranis character. I think Ed O'Neill as the hard-nosed older school coach, he's a little bit Parcellsian. He's probably a little bit too previous generation. I don't know if he would treat his players as well. I want the bedside manner of Rick Moranis, Danny O'Shea, the offensive creativity, bringing in John Madden as a consultant. I just think he understands the modern football players. So Danny O'Shea is my mild-mannered head coach. I'm going to sort of upset the hierarchy here for the OC because this guy is a head coach, but I'm assuming he got fired from Marshall, after all this time. And Matthew McConaughey, Jack Langle in real life from We Are Marshall, I think he's kind of got that, he's got the cliched handsome face for the offensive coordinator. McConaughey is going to have a lot of, quick wit. He's going to have a lot of good motivation. He's going to have one-liners. And I think he's probably going to get hired away at some point to be another head coach. But I think he wanted to move up maybe from the college ranks and be your pro offensive coordinator. So I'm going to take McConaughey from Marshall. And my DC, it's got to be Bill Yost. I mean, from Remember the Titans, they're not going to gain another yard. I think that's my guy. I thought about Denzel, but then I realized that he called a run play with the season on the line as time was expiring and got really lucky, but he still did that. And I can't that's kind of like Kellen Moore calling a run play with the game on the line. I can't get it out of my head.
There's no sunshine on the Vikings team to go up and block like 8 guys down the sideline to get them into the end zone. So awesome. I have a Remember the Titans coach as well. I'm going to go Coach Boone as my head coach. So we're not going to have him run the offense, but as a leader of men, as someone who's just going to get the team into shape, specifically Denzel playing Coach Boone. There's a real Coach Boone out there. I don't need him. I need Denzel playing Coach Boone as my head coach. Just for the content alone, the fieriness, our team's gonna be ready to play. So we've got that there. I'm gonna bring in a couple modern guys for my offensive and defensive coordinator. Offensive coordinator, I'm going Eric Taylor from Friday Night Lights, the coach there. Just prolific offenses. He's a former quarterback. My team's gonna be serious. The head coaching candidates don't have a lot of one-liners. They're not gonna be super funny. But we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of football. I like that tandem of Taylor and Boone heading the offense. Mm-hmm. And then defensively, I thought about Yost, but I couldn't do 2 Remember the Titans. So we're bringing it real modern. I don't know if you've watched Ted Lasso. I'm obsessed with Ted Lasso. We're not going with Ted Lasso because I don't think Ted has much in-depth football knowledge. I thought about him as my head coach, but basically the brains behind the whole operation is Coach Beard. silent, always studying, always just has everything down. He's basically like, if Ted's all the leadership and energy, Beard is all the brains behind it. And so that's the guy I want running the defense. I think, again, he's serious. He's going to have him ready to play, but he's also got some snarkiness, some dry humor to add to that room, which I think will need it with the two other head coaches. I think he'll play off them well, and I think he's going to have my defense ready to play. So that is my 3.
You didn't. What's the name of the guy who is the assistant that he hired who
Nate.
swears all the time? No, not the guy who left them. Who's the former player? What's his name?
Oh, Roy.
You didn't go with Roy.
Roy could have been a good option.
Should have gone with Roy. Also, let me challenge you on the Ted Lasso thing. Where did Ted Lasso come from?
I mean, like D3 Wichita State or whatever. You know,
he was a champion though, wasn't he?
I know, but I guess we've never seen if he's an offensive defensive guy. I've always thought he's more of the he's going to be the PJ
more of a head coach type.
He's the PJ Fleck like recruiter. Like he's getting guys in the building. I'm not sure how much he's scheming up. But if we were if we were doing this for college, I think Lasso would be an incredible recruiter. So I think that has to be said. But in my pro coaching staff, I don't think he's quite there. I thought about him for the head coach, but decided to give some love doing it to the assistant.
I love Coach Beard too.
Yes.
I mean, I worry that he's distracted with his love life a little too much, but
maybe a little bit.
You know, I do think there was some catharsis in that regard. No, I won't give any spoilers away though. Go see Ted Lasso.
Go see Ted Lasso. That is our plea. Finally, our 4th hot route. We're doing 4 today. There was some discussion about just the broadcast booths. Every year in the playoffs, I think we get this because everyone's watching the same games. They're hearing the same people talk. Everyone is picking up on the good things, the bad things. So I want to rank some broadcast booths. I know you're part of a broadcast booth, calling play-by-play hockey. So you have some, hopefully some expertise to bring to this. And so we're going to rank 4 booths. You can rank the CBS top booth of Nance and Romo, the NBC, Chris and Al, Fox, Joe, and Troy, and then you get a wild card. Any broadcast booth you want to mention. I didn't want to throw ESPN in there. I think they probably would have been last on everyone's list. So we're going with a wild card there. So you have to rank your top 4 broadcast booths.
Yeah. Manning Cast probably makes a strong bid there for the wild card, but I'm a purist. I appreciate the play-by-play, the color roll, so I gotta keep it to that. I think my number 1, and remember, this is entire booth. Everybody knows I'm a Joe Buck stan. So he would easily be my number 1 play-by-play option, but it's a booth. So I'm going to put my biases to the side, and I'm probably going to go with the Romo-Nance combo number 1. And I'm a little down on Nance overall. Like in the Pantheon, I don't think Nance is number 1. But I think Romo is distinctive enough and unique enough that he brings something different to the broadcast that we don't hear. And I appreciate kind of their back and forth and just the way they keep my attention. So that's my number 1. Would you like to alternate with me? Would you like to give your number 1?
Sure. Number 1 for me is Chris and Al. For me, it's just been a staple of like that Sunday night. That's kind of when I really, really got into football, was that game and that Sunday night game, and always sitting down in the gravitas that game usually has. And so that has just kind of been a classic of me growing up. And so I think Al is kind of the OG in the play-by-play role, still doing really, really well, probably one of the best broadcasters of all time. So Al and Chris, kind of off that notoriety, was one of my favorites. And yeah, it was kind of the tandem. I'm not sure either of them are my favorite play-by-play or my favorite color, but they're both really solid and they present a solid booth. And so they're my number 1.
Okay. I think this list gets really hard, to be honest with you, because I like pieces of all these guys, but I'm going to, since it's hot routes, I'm going to elevate my wild card up to number 2. And I'm going to go with the team that called the game this past weekend. Ian Eagle and Charles Davis. The CBS number 2 is phenomenal. I think Ian Eagle, pound for pound, is maybe one of the best broadcasters going today. And he doesn't have a lot of number 1 jobs. He's the number 2 NFL for CBS. He rotates in doing some TNT basketball. He does March Madness on CBS. He does Nets basketball over in Brooklyn. He does Thursday Night Football on radio. He does a lot of stuff, and he's unbelievable at all of it. He hits big moments. He's a big time, like big moment broadcaster that you want in a close game. And Charles Davis is one of the best color men out there too. So I'm putting those guys up at number 2 because they need to be shown some love, I think, for their efforts.
That is my number 2 as well. So we're in agreement.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
I am a big Iron Eagle guy. Big Iron Eagle guy. And Charles kind of compliments him really, really well with the football analysis. I wanted for my wild card, I love Kevin Harlan. I wanted to get him in there, but I don't think his color is ever distinctive enough to quite bring him in there. And there's some newer options. Just for the fun of it, I love Gus Johnson, even though he doesn't quite fit what I'm looking for in these rankings. Couldn't justify putting him up against some of the top guys, but I like him and Aqib Talib just for a fun broadcast. But yeah, for everything you said, I echo Iron Eagle, Charles Davis, number 2.
And Ian Son doing the Nickelodeon game the last 2 years sounds exactly like him. It's uncanny how similar they are. And he does Clippers basketball on radio. But my number 3, it's my guy. It's my guy, Buck and Aikman. And I know, people will think, sacrilege, like Al and Chris can't be last. And it's hard. It's hard to choose.
It's hard.
I think Buck is far more in his prime than Al is in his prime. I think Al, to my ear, has lost a step. I still think he's good. I still think he's clever. But Buck just doesn't make mistakes. He sets up the game, and he's not boring, folks. I mean, he used to be. I admit that. Like his early years, he was figuring it out. But if you listen to Buck the last 10, 12 years, the guy is not a boring announcer. He brings it. He gets excited. Just stop with that narrative. So I'll go Buck elevates the booth. Aikman follows along, and their two have chemistry because they're really good friends with each other. I like their dynamic, even though a lot of people hate it.
Yes. 3 for me is also Joe Buck and Troy Aikman. I agree with you. I am a Buck guy. I think he does a really good job. I watch a lot of golf. He did really well on the golf coverage when he was over there and Fox was doing it. He does MLB. Like he's pretty malleable, and I really enjoy his calls. Troy is where that booth loses me a little bit, but this was Buck alone. He might be my number 1 guy, so that it was very difficult. And then 4, I like this. We're having opposite 1s and 4s. We have the same middle, but we have different highs and lows. Jim and Tony, I think a couple years ago, I would have maybe put them number 1. Tony's thing is losing me a little bit. I don't know. I think he gets really excited and he can call some plays, but there have been a couple games this year when there's been blowouts and Romo just doesn't quite know how to carry a broadcaster to help a broadcast along when it's down super far. Like he's really great for the really, really close games. He's going to scream, "Oh, Jim," like he's going to do that whole thing and it's going to be really intense. But I don't know, like he just was kind of brought into this, he didn't have any time in the minor leagues to kind of perfect the craft and he kind of jumped in. And I think we're starting now after the first kind of year where the honeymoon phase with Romo, we're starting to see some of his gaps as a broadcaster just a little bit. And so I think that goes into it. And then Nance, I really enjoy Nance. But I like Joe better. I like Ian Eagle better probably. And then the Chris Al tandem, I just can't be beat for me. So yes, they're at number 4, but I like all these broadcasts. There's a reason we rank top 4 broadcasts. There'd be a lot of guys below them.
Yeah. I could go back and forth on this all day. I think here's your problem with Nance and Romo, to really get into the weeds. And remember, I put them number 1, so I do like them. And I think Romo is the one that elevates it for me. But remember with Summerall and Madden, Summerall was the ultimate minimalist. He would get out of the way and let Madden go. Nance is not a minimalist. And Joe Buck would actually be perfect with Romo because Buck knows when to lay out. If you watch big games with Nance, if there's a big moment, he typically talks over it. And if you watch the end of the Cowboys-Niners game during the Dak scramble, they're talking over each other. They're both trying to opine, and it got a little bit hectic in the booth. That would not happen with a Summerall Madden, wouldn't happen with Buck and anybody. But you do have 2 announcers that like to talk with Nance and Romo. And I think that And that does create a little bit of a problem, particularly in bigger moments. But that being said, I can look past that. I can get over that. I still feel stupid putting Allen Chris last, but sometimes they can blather a little bit about the great players and the great quarterbacks a little too much for my taste. They kind of get into, Aaron Rodgers worship a little too much, Tom Brady worship, and that can rub me the wrong way.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad we had some contention there. And we had a little bit of a different list. Sam, thank you for joining me. This might have been our best Hot Routes yet. I loved our questions. I thought it was a great discussion. So thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, I enjoyed every second. Let's do it again sometime.
All right. Thanks everyone for watching.